Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As I never get tired of saying, the point of this show is to hold the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. To do so, we don't just focus on the behavior of individual cops, but we also call out the powerful political institutions that make bad policing possible. And today, we have a breaking news update that shows just how much the underlying system emboldens police. But before I get started, I want you to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please email it to us privately at par@therealnews.com and we might be able to investigate. And please like, share, and comment on our videos. It really does help. And you know I read your comments and appreciate them. Okay. Back to the report. This is exclusive information that we are revealing on this show, which speaks directly to our mission and shows just how difficult real reform is. That's because the PAR has learned yet another Baltimore City police officer has been charged with a serious crime. And for details, I'm going to my reporting partner, Janis, who has the breaking news. Stephen, what can you tell us and what have you learned about this case?
We have just learned on September 11th that Officer Edmund Lehman was indicted for 2 counts of second-degree assault and 1 count of misconduct in office. The charges are related to an encounter in a fast food joint in Baltimore where the officer was called to the scene to intervene when 2 diners were eating inside against the rules at that time. And instead what happened was a confrontation where the officer ended up pushing one of the people into a glass door or into a piece of glass and then throwing another one to the side, then pushing another one onto the ground and putting a knee into his back. So it was a very violent encounter. He was also overheard on his partner's body cam footage saying, "I'm going to beat someone up," or "I'm going to beat this person up." So clearly the body cam footage was problematic. Also, his narrative of what happened, in other words, the report that he filed, was contradicted by the body cam footage of his partner. So that's where the misconduct in office charge comes from.
Now, these charges are just some of the most recent filed against Baltimore police officers. The department is under a consent decree. So I'm wondering, why does this keep happening?
Well, it's good to remember that one of our worst police scandals, the gun trace task force, which robbed residents, dealt drugs, and stole overtime, occurred while the Justice Department was here in Baltimore in 2016 investigating the department. Since then, there's been at least 24, maybe 40 or 50 indictments and 22 to 23 officers actually convicted. So there's been a string of cases. So it seems like the consent decree is not working. Now, just so people know, the consent decree was an agreement with the federal government between Baltimore City and the federal government, the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, saying that Baltimore would implement reforms. Well, it really hasn't worked out.
Now, before I go back to Stephen, I want to offer some evidence as to why these types of cases continue to happen and how difficult it will be to reform. Remember, bad policing does not occur in a vacuum. Part of what makes it possible is something we refer to often on the show called the political economy. A political economy, simply put, is defined by the entanglement between politics and money, a relationship where the cash generated by a political process fuels the growth and insulates that same process so that it perpetuates itself. In other words, a democratically unvirtuous cycle that abets the growth and power of elites and insiders at the expense of the rest of us. But how does that political economy fuel the problem we're talking about? How does a concept that parses out the relationship between money and political power apply to policing? Well, I can answer by simply showing you this document. It's a letter written by command staff of the Baltimore Police Department supporting legislative changes of our state capital of Annapolis. The focus of the letter is an obscure law that receives little attention, but is front and center on the problems we examine every week in this show. It's called the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, or the LEOBR. It's a law that carves out special protections for police officers in Maryland. And one of those protections is the subject of the letter. Let me explain. When a police officer is charged with a crime, even if it's a felony, he or she can't be fired, according to the LEOBR, at least not in Maryland. Instead, the officer is suspended until the trial is completed and the verdict rendered. Well, fair enough, but one would expect once the cop has had his or her day in court and that he or she is found guilty, that logic would dictate the officer would be immediately fired. But that's not the case. Thanks to the LEOBR, instead, as this letter outlines, officers have a right to a so-called trial board. Well, what is it? A trial board is an administrative body that determines if the officer has violated any internal policies of the department. Its job is to hold a hearing after the department's internal affairs division undertakes an investigation of the officer. But here's the catch. By law, the investigation starts after the trial of the officer is completed. In other words, only when the entire legal process has run its course can internal affairs start its investigation of the officer. Well, what does this mean? Put simply, it means that firing an officer in our state, even if he or she has committed a crime, can take years. And to show what this means, I'm going to go back to Stephen. Now, Stephen, you asked the department about this process because you had heard a number of officers who had been convicted. Let me underline the word convicted of serious crimes are still on the city's payroll. What did you learn?
Well, I was hearing that officers who've been convicted like 2 years ago were still getting a paycheck. And it turns out I was right. The department sent me this memo that they had circulated with people who were involved in legislation in Annapolis, saying that, which is our state capital, saying they wanted to get rid of LEOBR because they can't fire these guys. And there were many examples of people who've been convicted in 2018 and were still earning a salary.
So, Stephen, right now we're showing the video of both cops, Officer Pinera, who planted evidence on an innocent man, and Officer Nicholson, who assaulted a pizza worker. And you're saying they're still on the payroll?
Yeah, Officer Pinero actually just resigned in June of 2020, I believe, or over the summer. He had been collecting his salary for almost 2 years after his conviction. Officer Nicholson, likewise, he had gone on mental health distress relief, but at the same time, they had been working or earning a living from the Baltimore Police Department long after their conviction, which points to the flaws in the law.
So now you've done some research. How common are laws like our own LEOBR? I know ours was started in Maryland in 1974, and I think a lot of other states modeled their own laws on ours.
Well, depending on the source that you use, anywhere from 14 to 16 states have some form of law that makes it extremely difficult to fire a police officer and also grants police officers special rights that we don't get. So this is a law that's not uncommon throughout the country where police officers are given these special rights, and is one of the reasons it's so almost impossible to fire a police officer.
It's clear that in this state and others, legislators have done something that seems almost inconceivable in a country where equal treatment under the law is the national credo. They've created a distinct and separate political class exempt from the accountability which governs the rest of us. Think about it. Our state is known as an at-will employment state. In other words, unless you happen to be one of the few people covered by a union, employers can fire you without cause. That means an employee here has no inherent rights to a job, and that an employer can fire you for staring out the window in your office, or truthfully for almost any reason, provided it's not discriminatory based on age, race, or gender. Just look at the case of Daniel Nicholson. He was caught on this video punching a pizza worker over a dispute with Nicholson's daughter. According to payroll records obtained by the Police Accountability Report, Nicholson made $95,000 per year since he was convicted of the crime. In fact, according to police, Nicholson took a 12-month leave of the department over stress. Imagine if you or I had the same rights. Another aspect of the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights is the right to wait up to 10 days before having to give your witness testimony. Can you imagine being picked up for a crime, asked for your witness statement, and telling the officers, I would like to go home for a week and think about my answer before I give it? Also, the interview has to be conducted at a reasonable time and with appropriate breaks. Well, this sounds very different than the average interrogation for your average citizen. It sounds impossible, and yet this is afforded to police officers. Also, when officers are given an internal hearing for discipline, it is conducted by fellow officers. They are appointed by the chief, and at least 2 of them are chosen from their own police department. Wouldn't you feel more comfortable if the people who were deciding whether you were guilty or innocent were friendly coworkers? If the officer is suspended as a result of the investigation, he must continue to receive full pay and benefits until his case is resolved. In most states, the charging department must subsidize the accused officer's legal defense. So while we have to hope and pray for a good public defender or spend our hard-earned cash out of pocket, the officer is employed and doesn't have to worry about legal fees. Sounds like a 2-tiered system of justice to me. With a system like that, is it any wonder that the crimes we reported on at the beginning of this show continue to occur? How can we expect cops to respect the law if the laws that govern them are not just lenient, but downright licentious? That's the reason we continue not to just report on policing itself, but all aspects of the questionable governance and corrupt political influence which continue to bolster it. It's a promise to continue to expose the underlying system which makes bad policing possible that we will continue to do to keep you informed, and a promise to keep that same system on notice that we are watching. I would like to thank intrepid reporter Stephen Janis for his editing, writing, and research on this piece. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Tay, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And of course, I would be remiss if I did not thank friend of the show, Noli D. Thanks, Noli. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please like and comment. It really helps. And I do read your comments and appreciate them. And I try to answer your questions whenever I can. My name is Taya Graham, and I am your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.